On a hot summer night in 1822, the sky above a plantation in South Carolina turned orange. The flames could be seen from miles away. Neighbors later said the fire rose so high that it looked like the entire horizon was burning. By the time the sun began to rise the next morning, the plantation house was gone. The barns were gone. The cotton stores were gone. What had once been a powerful estate had become a smoking field of ash and blackened timber. Plantation owners nearby believed the fire must have been an accident. Lightning was the first explanation people offered. Some blamed a careless lantern left burning in the barn. Others believed the dry summer wind had simply carried a small flame farther than anyone expected. But rumors began spreading almost immediately. The fire had not started randomly. Someone had started it, and that someone knew exactly what they were doing, because something else had happened that night. When the smoke cleared and the plantation owner began counting the people under his control, he realized that dozens were missing. Men were gone. Women were gone. Children were gone. Nearly 30 people had vanished during the fire, and the one man who understood every building on the plantation better than anyone else had disappeared with them. His name was Jonah Reed. Jonah was known across the plantation as the carpenter. In the world of plantations, carpenters held a strange position. They were still enslaved, still controlled, still owned like property under the law. But their skills made them valuable. A carpenter could repair roofs after storms, build barns for storage, fix broken wagons, replace doors, reinforce beams, and construct new cabins for workers arriving from the slave markets. Plantation owners relied heavily on carpenters because the entire system depended on constant construction and repair. Jonah had spent most of his life learning wood. He knew how different trees behaved when cut. He knew which timber would bend without breaking and which would snap under pressure. He knew how to frame walls so they would survive storms. He knew how to carve joints so tight that the wood could hold together without nails. But more importantly, Jonah knew the plantation itself. He knew every building. He knew every weak spot. He knew every stack of dry lumber, every storage barn filled with cotton, every shed where tools were kept, and every narrow path between structures where wind could carry a spark. For years he moved freely across the plantation grounds while repairing structures. He climbed onto rooftops to patch leaks. He crawled under floors to fix rotting supports. He entered barns and storage buildings when no one else paid attention. Plantation owners rarely watched him closely because they needed him. And while he worked, he observed everything. The plantation itself had grown over time. The main house stood on a slight rise overlooking the cotton fields. Around it were barns filled with harvested cotton, storage buildings, tool sheds, livestock pens, and long rows of small cabins where the enslaved workers lived. Each structure had been built at different times, often without careful planning. Buildings stood closer together than they should have. Dry timber sat stacked against walls. Cotton bales were stored beside wooden beams that had been baking in the southern heat all summer. It was the kind of place that could burn easily. Jonah understood that. But at first, fire was not part of any plan. At first, he was simply surviving. Life on the plantation followed a harsh rhythm that rarely changed. Workers rose before sunrise. They walked to the fields under the supervision of overseers carrying whips. Cotton was planted, picked, sorted, and packed day after day. Injuries were common. Exhaustion was constant. And punishment could come at any moment. Jonah's work as a carpenter spared him some of the worst labor in the fields, but it did not spare him from fear. Families were often separated without warning. Plantation owners frequently sold people when money was needed or debts had to be paid. A person could wake up one morning with family beside them and go to sleep that night knowing they would never see those loved ones again. Jonah had seen it happen many times. He had watched husbands taken away in chains. He had watched mothers scream while children were dragged toward wagons heading south. Each sale tore another hole in the fragile community that enslaved people tried to build among themselves. Still, people survived by holding on to small hopes. Quiet conversations took place at night inside the cabins. Songs carried coded messages about endurance and faith. Stories passed from one generation to the next about freedom and distant places where slavery did not exist. Jonah listened to those stories carefully. But more than anything else, he listened to the land itself. Carpenters often worked late into the evening, finishing repairs after the fields had emptied. During those quiet hours, Jonah sometimes stood alone beside unfinished structures, studying how wind moved through the plantation. The summer breeze flowed between buildings in predictable ways. Certain narrow paths acted like funnels, pushing air faster as it squeezed between walls and fences. He noticed where piles of lumber dried in the sun. He noticed where cotton dust collected inside barns. He noticed which structures were closest together. These observations were small things at first, pieces of knowledge gathered without purpose. But over time they began to form a map in his mind, and that map revealed something dangerous. If a fire ever started in the right place, under the right wind, the entire plantation could burn. But even then, Jonah did not immediately think of destruction. The first idea that came to him was escape. Stories about escape circulated quietly among enslaved communities. Some people tried running north toward free states. Others tried reaching the swamps where patrols had difficulty tracking them. But escape was incredibly dangerous. Most attempts failed. Slave catchers were skilled trackers, and anyone captured while fleeing could face brutal punishment. Jonah knew that simply running away was rarely enough. If people were going to escape successfully, they would need time. Time to disappear before patrols organized. Time to reach forests or rivers where tracking would be harder. And time required distraction. The idea of using fire as that distraction began slowly forming in his mind. But planning such a thing could not happen overnight. It required patience. Years passed while Jonah continued working as the plantation carpenter. During that time, he quietly built small modifications into the structures he repaired. In one barn, he installed a loose section of flooring that could be lifted from below. In another building, he created a narrow crawl space behind stacked timber. In a storage shed, he reinforced a hidden area beneath a platform used to store tools. None of these spaces were large. Each one was just big enough for a few people to hide if necessary. But together they formed a network of hiding places scattered across the plantation. He told almost no one about them. Only a few trusted friends knew what he had built. Because on plantations, secrets were fragile. A single careless word could lead to punishment or worse. So the hidden spaces remained quiet parts of the landscape, unnoticed by overseers who rarely examined buildings closely. For years they remained unused. Then came the announcement that changed everything. One evening the plantation owner gathered several workers near the main house. Sales were common events, but the tension in the air that night felt heavier than usual. The owner spoke casually about debts and business arrangements. Several people would be sold the next morning and transported south. When he began reading the list of names, Jonah felt his stomach tighten. One of the names belonged to his younger sister. Another belonged to her son, a small boy barely old enough to work. Jonah stood silently while the announcement continued. He kept his eyes on the ground, showing no reaction. Any sign of anger or grief could attract attention. But inside his mind something shifted. The plan that had existed only as an idea suddenly became urgent. There would be no time to prepare slowly. The sale was scheduled for morning. Wagons would arrive before sunrise. Once people were loaded into those wagons, they would be taken far away, perhaps to another state entirely. Jonah understood that if anything was going to happen, it had to happen that night. After darkness settled across the plantation, he moved quietly between cabins. He spoke only to those he trusted most. Word spread carefully. Those who were willing to try escaping gathered near the barns where the hidden spaces existed. Nearly 30 people agreed to go. Some were young men strong enough to travel quickly. Others were mothers carrying small children. Each person understood the risk. If the attempt failed, punishment would be severe. But the alternative was certain separation. They entered the hidden spaces before midnight. The wind that night was strong. Jonah had noticed it earlier while working near the barns. The breeze flowed steadily across the fields toward the main house, pushing through the narrow gaps between buildings exactly as he had observed many times before. He walked alone toward the largest barn. Inside were stacks of dry cotton waiting to be shipped. Cotton burned easily, especially after months of drying in the southern heat. The wooden beams above the cotton were old and brittle. It was the perfect place. He lit a small flame. At first it was nothing more than a weak flicker against the darkness. But the wind moved through the open slats of the barn walls, feeding the fire oxygen. The flame touched loose cotton fibers. Those fibers caught quickly, spreading sparks upward toward the wooden beams. Within minutes, the fire began climbing. Jonah stepped outside and watched. The flames grew faster than he expected. Dry cotton ignited almost instantly once the fire took hold. Smoke poured from the barn roof. Then the entire structure erupted into bright orange light. Shouts began echoing across the plantation. Workers ran from cabins carrying buckets of water. Overseers shouted orders. The plantation owner emerged from the main house half-dressed, screaming for men to form a line to the well. But the wind continued pushing the fire forward. Another building caught. Then another. The flames moved from barn to storage shed, from shed to tool house, from tool house toward the main residence itself. While everyone focused on stopping the fire, Jonah returned to the hiding spaces. One by one the people inside crawled out. They ran toward the tree line at the edge of the plantation fields. The fire behind them illuminated the night sky, making it easier to see the path ahead. Smoke and shouting covered the sound of their footsteps. By the time plantation owners realized people were missing, the group had already reached the forest. And once they entered the trees, the darkness swallowed them. By sunrise, the plantation had burned nearly to the ground. Investigators later searched for explanations. Some insisted lightning must have started the blaze. Others suspected sabotage but could find no proof. The chaos of the night had destroyed most evidence. But one fact remained undeniable. Jonah Reed was gone, and the plantation he once built no longer existed. In the years that followed, stories circulated quietly across the region. Some claimed Jonah had led the group north toward free states. Others believed they traveled through swamps where slave catchers rarely ventured. No official records confirmed their fate. But among the enslaved communities of the South, the story survived. They spoke of the carpenter who understood every beam and every weakness of the system that held them captive, and who used that knowledge not just to build, but to bring the entire structure down in a single night. For more historic content like this, subscribe to our channel.